Hi, everybody. Welcome back. AP Environmental Science. This is topic 1.8, which is on a topic called primary productivity. This one's a little tricky. It's not crazy hard, but um, there's definitely some chemistry involved in this, and there's a little bit of math involved in it. I don't think it's really that hard, but you may want to watch this video more than once to like really fully understand it. So let's get started. Let's kind of see how this goes. Again, topic 1.8, primary productivity. Now, I didn't mention this term before, productivity. And I kind of used it in reference to plants, in an ecosystem. I said that the more plant life you have, generally the more productive that particular ecosystem is going to be. So we're going to start today talking a little bit about plants and their kind of role in the ecosystem. I think we sort of understand by now, at least throughout our scholastic careers, we've probably heard of this term, producers, or another term for that is an autotroph. These are organisms that have to produce food for themselves, right? I mean, they can't go to McDonald's and buy a cheeseburger. I mean, a plant can't do that, so they have to have some way to eat, right? So they have to photosynthesize. They have to produce their own food. Hence, they're called producers. Now, again, that all is powered by the sun. Sunlight is obviously an important part of photosynthesis. But I don't care if we're talking about a big tree like this on the left, or some little algae that are living in a pond. Sunlight is kind of the driving force behind producing food for plants. So let's kind of take a closer look at the process of photosynthesis. So at the top here, I like this diagram a lot because it kind of breaks everything down for us nice and neat. Let's kind of focus on this equation. We're kind of looking at this leaf up here. Again, it's the green kind of areas of the plant that are the ones that are photosynthesizing because they're the ones that have the chlorophyll and the chloroplast, right? But just kind of looking at this equation from the left, right? This is the reactant side of the equation. If you took chemistry class, you probably remember the terms reactants and products. So we have solar energy, right? That's sunlight. And we have water, and we have CO2, we have carbon dioxide. So these three things are needed. They're reacting together. If you look at the picture here, you see that they're arrows pointing into the leaf because that's what's happening there. But they react together. They produce a couple of products. Got an interruption there by our intercom. Anyway, so our products here are two things. One you probably recognize is oxygen gas, O2. The other one you may not recognize. This is a carbohydrate. This is glucose, C6H12O6. You should definitely recognize those formulas at some point. So glucose is the sugar that plants use to feed with. That's what they use as food. Oxygen gas, this is given off by the plant. Obviously, animals will breathe that in. But again, this glucose can either be, it could be used by the plant for food, but any excess glucose that's produced, that could also be food for animals. So that's why I have this arrow over here on the right, because this process of photosynthesis actually kind of kickstarts the process of what we call cellular respiration. So think about an animal, like this mouse or even yourself. I mean, what are two things that are like super important to you, right? You need oxygen and you need food, right? You need energy. We get that from glucose. So these two things we have to consume, hence we're heterotrophs. We can't make them on our own. And then we produce these things. We produce carbon dioxide, which we just exhale. We produce water, which we could store in our cells, or we can urinate it out or sweat it out or whatever. And we produce energy in the form of heat. This is why our skin is warm, right? Because our cells are actually producing that heat. So again, this process kind of kickstarts the other one. So you kind of see that these two things kind of go hand in hand. One process kind of triggers the other one kind of triggers the other process. So make sure we are familiar with these two things. And if you think about it, they're just the opposite of each other. They're just kind of flip flopped. The reactants in photosynthesis are really the products in respiration. You notice the arrow here has been flip flopped. Okay, and vice versa. The products that are in photosynthesis are kind of the reactants for respiration. So be familiar with this diagram. This is actually a really important one that we kind of understand the processes of photosynthesis and respiration. All right, now one more thing I think is kind of important that we know that maybe a lot of people don't really know. I think we always think plants are these autotrophs and they photosynthesize all the time, but that's not necessarily true. Plants, it kind of depends on what time of the day it is. They photosynthesize and they respirate depending on time of the day. And really that depends on whether or not the sun is out. During the daytime when the sun is out, you would think that a plant would be photosynthesizing, and that's exactly what they do, right? They take in a lot of carbon dioxide during the day, and they release oxygen gas as well. I mean, that's part of photosynthesis. But at nighttime, when there is no sunlight, plants are actually kind of doing the opposite. They're actually respirating to where they're taking in oxygen or using some of the oxygen that they produce during the day, and they're producing carbon dioxide. So this is kind of a respiratory process over here at night, and during the daytime they're actually photosynthesizing. So plants actually do both. That's important to remember. Now the thing is, these two processes really aren't in balance. The daytime process, the photosynthesis, is kind of the more dominant process of the two, compared to the nighttime process where they're photosynthesizing more, or correction, where they're respirating more. So really, even though these two processes happen, this one on the left happens more. So, for example, plants are producing more oxygen during the day than they're taking in at night. So overall, plants are producing oxygen. That's why we kind of consider them to be autotrophic and photosynthetic and all that type of stuff. But again, they do both things. So make sure we kind of understand that. So the importance of photosynthesis, why we should go out and maybe hug a tree every once in a while, is that one, plants produce food. They produce glucose, right, which animals or heterotrophs consume. So without photosynthesis, there wouldn't be any usable energy for us. So that's an important thing. The other thing they do is they produce oxygen gas, right? That's needed for heterotrophs to perform their cellular respiration. So these two things super duper important. Now, cellular respiration, kind of the flip side of photosynthesis, why that's so important. Again, organisms need to convert chemical energy into food from plants. So, for example, the reason why cellular respiration is important to an animal is so that we can get food, right? I mean, that's important. We need to eat plants or eat animals that eat plants so that we can utilize that energy. Another thing is that we produce CO2, right? So plants can use that stuff to help their photosynthesis. So make sure we kind of understand the importances of respiration and also photosynthesis. All right. Now, the next part of this, I want to get into the concept of productivity. More specifically, it's called gross primary productivity or net primary productivity. Here in red, this is kind of an important statement. It says the amount of energy that's available in an ecosystem determines how much life the ecosystem can support. And that's totally true. Like if you take, for example, a tropical rainforest versus a desert, and ask, which of those two would have more biodiversity, would have more living things. I mean, we would probably say a tropical rainforest does, right? And that again is because it's a more productive ecosystem. And that's also partially due to the amount of energy that's available to all the living things in that ecosystem. I'm not saying that there's not any energy in the desert, there is, but in a tropical rainforest, there's a lot more. So that means there could be more organisms. Your food chains will probably be a lot longer. Your food webs might be a lot more complex. But let's kind of take a look at these two terms here. All right, gross and net. Now, you might be familiar with the terms gross and net kind of in a sort of an economics sense, like with your paychecks. If any of you guys have a job, we'll talk more about that on the next slide, but like your gross pay versus your net pay. But here it says the gross productivity is the total amount of solar energy that producers in an area capture for photosynthesis. I mean, imagine if you had a tropical rainforest. Think about all of the solar energy that all those plants can capture, let's say during a day or a week or a year. That's the gross. Now, just because they capture that energy doesn't necessarily mean they're going to use all that energy or all that energy is going to be available to them. Because net primary productivity, NPP, is the energy captured, that's the GPP, minus the energy that's respired. Remember, plants not only capture energy, but they also release it when they respirate as part of cellular respiration. So they're going to lose some of that energy. So I kind of look at it like this. If you look at it like a paycheck, like let's say you work at McDonald's or something, and I don't know, you work 30 or 40 hours a week or something, making X amount of per hour. Let's say your total amount of pay is $500. That's what you've earned. So $500 is your gross pay. But we all know that there's going to be money taken out for taxes, right? So let's say Uncle Sam gets $150 of that. Your net pay is going to be $350. So I think this kind of helps us understand that there's gross and net. Gross is what you earned. Net is what you take home. It's kind of depressing to know that you lost $150, but trust me, when you make a heck of a lot more money, you'll get a lot more money taken out. So it gets even more depressing, trust me. All right, so we can also kind of look at it this way. Our sun produces a tremendous amount of energy, and some of that energy reaches the earth. This is kind of interesting here. It says 99% of solar energy is reflected or passes through producers without even being absorbed. So think about that. 99% of all the energy that makes its way to the earth doesn't even get used by living things. So that's a lot of energy that doesn't even get used at all, right? So that means that only 1% of all the solar energy that makes it to earth is actually captured by plants, only 1%. And amongst that 1%, 60% of that energy is lost because of respiration. And that means that only 40% is left. So if you think of this as like $1,000 paycheck, right, we're losing $600 to taxes and we're only taking $400 home. That's kind of what this is, kind of signifying. All right. So again, think of it as this is our gross, and this is our gross here, and this is our net here, what we're actually taking home. So there's a formula for this that we can use. So we'll test this in a couple of slides. But our NPP, this is our net, is equal to our gross minus our respiration. So again, if we have $1,000, let's say that's our gross, and we're going to lose, I don't know, $400 in taxes, then our net is going to be 600. Okay, so we can use this formula very similarly to how we did this, right? Net pay equals gross minus your taxes. Think of the respiration as your taxes. That's what we kind of should think about that as. And we're going to lose that energy. That energy is going to be lost, but we're going to have something left in when we're all done. That's going to be our net. All right, this is kind of showing us some different net primary productivity values based on ecosystems or based on like biomes, things like that. Like if we just look at terrestrial, for example, you would expect, for example, a tropical rainforest to have the highest NPP. Now these units here are kind of funky. It says grams of carbon per meters squared per year. What that kind of is telling us is that the higher that value, the more carbon there is, and carbon is found in plants, per square meter. So think of like, I don't know, my desk, for example. My desk is about a square meter, per year. So the higher that number, the more plant life there is per square meter per year. And we would expect, for example, there to be more carbon per square meter per year in a rainforest than, let's say, the extreme desert. I think that would kind of make sense. So we're seeing that number kind of drop down as we get into some biomes that either lack a lot of precipitation or have temperature values that are kind of extreme. One interesting thing about this is this one right here, where it says cultivated land. Cultivated land is land that has been converted to agriculture. For example, they cut down rainforests all the time, and they convert it into cultivated land. Now, think about what that does to the productivity, right? You've got a region that has an extremely high level of productivity, and we're going to cut it down and convert it into farmland, cultivated land, which has a much lower net primary productivity value. So that's a big problem. I mean, think about all the biodiversity of living things that live and thrive on that productivity, and now we're going to be lessening that. So that's kind of a big deal, if you think about it. Aquatic systems, swamps and marshes. Think about wetlands. Swamps and marshes are wetlands, right? Think about all of that some submergent vegetation and the emergent vegetation that they have there. And that's an extremely high level of net productivity in those areas. The open ocean, it's gigantic for one. Yeah, there are a lot of algae and things like that, but I mean, because it's so big, its productivity value is actually pretty low. All right, so kind of become a little bit familiar with this graph. This is actually a pretty good one. All right, last thing here, let's do a quick math problem involving NPP and GPP. So it says a forest has an NPP of 1.4 kilograms of carbon per meter square feet. Don't worry so much about the unit, but that's the NPP value. It says it has and the rate of cellular respiration is 2.4. They want to know what is the GPP. This problem is super easy if you just know the formula. I'm not going to give this to you on quizzes or tests. You're going to have to know it, right? NPP equals GPP minus the respiration. So in the problem, they give us the NPP, right? They give us the respiration. Excuse me, I just sneezed. Oh, that's terrible. Anyway, didn't come out. The respiration they give to you. They want to know what the GPP is. So think about it as like solving for X. So it's just algebra. So let's plug numbers in, right? 1.4 is the NPP. GPP we don't know. 2.4 is the respiration. So you just solve for GPP. It's like super easy to do. This is like one of the easiest math problems that you'll ever do in your life. If you've taken Algebra 1, this is simple. You just have to know the equation. All right, that's it for primary productivity. Again, I might suggest watching this again in case this is kind of confusing to you. All right, guys, have a good day. I will see you